Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. You know, you were mentioning that Jewish woman running for school board in your district, Amy, in Lakeview, and talking about Brandon Johnson's anti-Semitism. That Reverend Mitchell Johnson, the newly appointed president of the Chicago School Board. Yeah. A good piece by a woman named Gabby Deutsch in Jewish Insider outlet. Detailing the inflammatory, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and pro-Hamas content on social media posted by one Reverend Mitchell Johnson, Brandon Johnson's newly minted board chairman for CPS. Huh.
Yeah, he's a sordid past, too. Yes.
Uh-huh. How can a group of people who have suffered from the Holocaust today join with the alt-right community? The Nazi Germans' ideology has been adopted by Zionist Jews. These are some of Johnson's ravings. The Israeli government offers a renewal of Nazi language once directed toward European Jews. I have been saying this since October 2023. People have an absolute right to attack their oppressors by any means necessary. Seems to be a rationalization for the October 7th terrorist attack. And so on and so forth. I mean, I think you get the tenor of it. So, in Chicago, like a lot of these big cities where identitarian politics dominate, you have this anti-Semitism rear its ugly head, which is why this upcoming conference at Moody Church is timely. Dr. Mitchell Glaser is the president of Chosen People Ministries, one of the oldest and largest Messianic missions in the United States, and he joins us now to talk about that upcoming conference. Dr. Glaser, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan and Amy. Wonderful to be with you this morning.
So this summit coming up the Saturday after the election, Saturday, November 9th, at Moody Bible in Chicago. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Boy, I hate to have the same first name as that other guy.
Yeah, well, right.
You can call me, make sure you call me Mitch. So
okay.
The conference is being held at the Institute, Moody Bible Institute, and it is going to, it's a summit, and it's designed to raise the awareness of those living in the greater Chicago area, and especially those who are Christians, to the growing and brutal anti-Semitism that's growing in our country and around the Western world right now even, and to motivate particularly those who are part of the church to pray for and act on behalf of the Jewish people. It's a time when the Jewish people need friends, and this has become very obvious, of course, in the greater Chicago area after what just happened the other day.
Well, how can Christians oppose anti-Semitism and support Jewish people? Like, what can we do?
Yeah, there's a number of things that Christians can do. Number one, of course, to pray. It was wonderful. Many churches paused during their services on Sunday, October 6th, to remember the October 7th massacre of 1,200 Jewish people and the taking of hundreds into taken as hostages and taking them into captivity. So that's something that Christians could do. They can just raise awareness and pay attention. And then, of course, there's the say something and do something if you see something. And so one of the areas where there's so much anti-Semitism, of course, is on campus. Now, a lot of Christians are parents of kids on campuses. There's no reason why, if you see that happening, you can't complain to the administration. It's happening I live in New York City, from Columbia to NYU, and The University of Chicago has had quite a bit of it. And so say something. Go to the administration. You're a paying customer, remember that, and you can say something. We can also really be active on social media, and if Christians see something, or non-Christians, we'd love everybody to stand with the Jewish people. Whatever is happening in social media, particularly if you see mistruths, go ahead and say something, write something. Don't be afraid, and post truth instead of allow falsehoods to reign. You know, Amy, between October 7th, 2023 and October 7th, 2024, there were over 10,000 anti-Semitic incidents reported in the United States. That's a 200% increase in the previous year. And 30% of them actually occurred on college campuses. And most of them, of course, are disguise themselves as some kind of political protests to what Israel's doing. But a lot of us have experienced that kind of anti-Semitism for decades and decades. My grandparents came to the United States to get away from that type of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and here it is again. And so it just seems that various incidents set off this kind of anti-Semitism. And as Christians, we have to realize that the Jewish people are still God's chosen people, and that when you touch the chosen people, you touch the apple or the cornea of God's eye. And so I think it's something that Christians should really take seriously. And it's part of who we are as believers in Jesus to, number one, love the Jewish Messiah Jesus, love the Jewish people, love the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to stand for the Jewish people.
How do you address the political question, you know, the assessment of what a civic-minded person should do politically with respect to this issue? Because, you know, at the end of the day, you're talking about, for example, one political party that features the likes of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who traffic in anti-Semitism and apologists and act as apologists for terrorist organizations like Hamas as a matter of routine. You know, these institutions you talk about that are beset by anti-Semitism, the universities, for example, well, you know, that they receive funding from state and federal government, and in one form or another, almost all of them, not named Hillsdale College, do. So, what's the call for Jews and Christians alike when it comes to these political decisions, which are, you know, civic decisions?
Well, you know, the first thing we should all do is vote. So I think that's an Christian obligation.
Yes.
But
in which direction?
Well, you know, that's not for me to say.
I understand, but but you can have a viewpoint on it.
I can, but you know, one of the wonderful things about voting is it's also personal.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to be very involved, but I think the political process is important. You know, thank God there are some wonderfully creative Christian leaders in politics and in the Jewish community as well, who I think are doing a superb job. I mean, look at I was listening to the incredible rise of protests over what happened in Chicago, where what this guy did in Rogers Park was not even viewed as a hate crime. And so those kinds of things need to be taken up. But there's also something with the church. I hate to say it, I really do, because it's not always true. But the church has not always been the best friend of the Jewish people. And Christians have an inside track on the church. A lot of people can deal with politics, and I hope they do. But we need to clean up the house a little bit. We need to make sure that Christians are not engaged with any kind of even the most subtle types of anti-Semitism. And I know that Christians are sincere and do not do it intentionally at times, but sometimes we repeat some elements of the culture that really need to be abandoned. And so that's why we have some great speakers like Dr. Michael Radelnik, who has led the Jewish Studies Department at Moody Bible Institute for decades and decades. And he's going to do a message on Saturday morning, November 9th, at Moody Bible Institute on a biblical explanation of anti-Semitism. I mean, that's really significant. The president of Moody Bible Institute, Mark Jobe, is going to talk about the biblical promise of people and the land. In other words, Christians need to recognize that the promise is not necessarily politically driven, but it is a spiritual thing. We're even going to have Salim Shalash, who, believe it or not, is an Arab pastor working in Nazareth, who's going to talk about some of the wonderful things that his church has been doing to help ameliorate the condition of Jewish people who have been suffering as a result. There are a lot of post-traumatic stress among those who have lost loved ones in Israel. And Don Sweeting, who's the chancellor, whose father, George Sweeting, was the longtime president of Moody Bible Institute, who's the chancellor of Colorado Christian College, is coming all the way to Chicago to tell us how to actually support Israel and the Jewish people, and why Christians especially should support Israel and the Jewish people. And so my real opinion, Don and Amy, is that we need to we really need to speak to the church as fellow Christians and say, listen, you've got to get on. It might be a Jewish protest, but throw in, man. Get out there. Like remember, just like what happened in Skokie. Get out there and stand for the Jewish people. Be visible.
100%. No, I agree. And the shooting in Rogers Park, we've been talking about all week, in part because the police have not, the police chief has not been candid with the public about the nature of what happened there. And so you're right. I mean, that's a good example of pressing the authorities to provide full disclosure and on the law enforcement side and on the prosecution side, prosecute the crimes that were clearly committed, all of them. But, you know, it was part of being, I think, a religious leader is being a civic leader, too. I mean, you have to, as you're saying, you have to speak out. And so it was interesting to hear from a 94-year-old Auschwitz survivor who spoke out against this characterization of Trump and Trump supporters even as Nazis. And I wonder what you think the role of spiritual leaders is. I mean, I know it brings you into politics and perhaps partisan politics, but it's really not partisan politics. It's there shouldn't be comparisons to of politicians you don't like to Hitler. I mean, it's so beyond the pale, and I wonder if you think religious leaders have a responsibility to address sort of the civic discourse when the political rhetoric gets to that excess.
Well, sure. I mean, it's an extreme move to compare anybody to Hitler. Okay, and you know what that does? Let's forget about the political leader for a moment. That humanizes what Hitler did. And we don't want to humanize what Hitler did and lower it to some kind of a trope, another trope against people. You know, when you talk about use the word Holocaust and take it outside of Germany and in the 1930s and 1940s and start talking about the Holocaust as another kind of Holocaust. You know, that's a particular word that should be left. Give the Jewish people something, friends. Let us at least have the word, Mm-hmm. And so I think that we need to be very careful about how we characterize things because it takes away from the brutality of what the word and the term or the comparison in leadership really means to the Jewish people. Same thing with Hamas, same thing with Hezbollah. Same thing with Iran. Sometimes we reduce the trauma by minimizing the events. And I've heard very little discussion, really, about the two Iranian attempts to bomb the daylights out of Israel. And I've also not heard a whole lot politically, as an American. I didn't hear about. We should have given America and our military a pat on the back for standing up for Israel. I mean, if it wasn't for U.S. action and the two Iranian onslaughts, we don't know what would have happened. Chosen People Ministries has 30 what we would call missionary families in Israel, and they have a lot of little kids. And I was on the phone with them during these missile attacks and drone attacks, and they were all in bomb shelters and having to deal with kids for 8 to 10 hours in a bomb shelter, something no American would find very, very pleasant. And I haven't heard a whole lot of good comparison, which says the United States stood up for Israel and the Jewish people. I've got to tell you, as a Jewish American, I'm very proud of our country.
Absolutely. Dr. Mitch Glaser is the president of the Chosen People Ministries. He was just mentioning one of the oldest and largest Messianic missions in the United States, and he will be at this summit on anti-Semitism at Moody Bible on Saturday, November 9th. Dr. Mitch Glaser, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And you can go on the Moody website at moodyconferences.com and register. We'd love to see you there. It's going to be a really meaningful time.
moodyconferences.com. Got it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If you have unfiled taxes or are in debt to the IRS, this is important news.